Wind howled under the bridge, cold and restless as the river thrashed beneath its concrete pillars. A small hand gripped a leash, knuckles white, and beside her was Bramble, her scruffy, sun-bleached dog with soulful eyes and a coat that smelled faintly of damp pine. The girl's heart pounded in her chest like a trapped bird as she stepped deeper into the shadowed space. Suddenly, she saw movement, 3 shapes huddled in a corner, silhouettes trembling in the gloom. One officer moaned, another whispered something she couldn't make out, and the third lay completely still. Her throat tightened. She should run, call for help, but Bramble nudged her forward with a nudge so gentle it felt like fate. In that moment, she knew she couldn't turn away. The bridge was more than concrete and cold darkness. It was a cradle of suffering, and somewhere in its echoing arches lay a secret that would change everything. The sky had been a gentle wash of pale gold, stretching lazily over the city's skyline, but beneath the bridge, the world was muted, swallowed by shadow. Concrete pillars rose like silent sentinels, their surfaces slick with damp, dark streaks where rain had run in the past. The wind slithered through the underpass, tugging at the girl's thin jacket, teasing her hair, whispering like some restless spirit. She held the leash tight, knuckles white, and felt Bramble at her side, a steady, low pressure against her calf. His fur smelled faintly of wet grass, mud, and a touch of something wild. The outdoors she had walked through countless times but never truly noticed until now. Each step she took on the uneven gravel beneath the bridge seemed louder than the last, echoing against concrete and steel, bouncing back at her like a warning. She had come down here because Bramble had insisted, tugging at his leash with an uncharacteristic urgency. Normally, he meandered, sniffing discarded wrappers or chasing the occasional rat. But today his movements were deliberate, purposeful. He pressed close to her side, ears pricked, tail low but stiff. His eyes, wide and intelligent, scanned the darkness, catching glimmers of shadow that she couldn't see. A shiver ran down her spine as she realized that the dog's instinct was sharp, more aware than her own senses. Then she saw it. Movement. 3 shapes, hunched together in the far corner of the underpass, partially obscured by the thick shadow. Her stomach lurched. The figures didn't move with the natural rhythm of someone simply sitting. One twitched, the second shivered violently, and the third lay still, an ominous weight against the cold floor. She wanted to scream, to run up the steps to the warm street above, but something anchored her in place. Bramble nudged her hand gently with his nose insistently, urging her forward as if saying, "This is where you belong, even if you're afraid." The air was thick with damp, the scent of wet concrete mixed with something metallic that made her stomach twist. Blood? She shook her head, trying not to panic. Her pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out the muted roar of the river beneath the bridge. Water surged and slapped against rocks, echoing hollowly in the cavernous space. Occasionally, a pebble dislodged from the embankment and tumbled down to the floor with a clatter, and she flinched each time. Bramble remained calm, steadying himself against her leg, eyes fixed on the figures ahead. One officer moved. A weak groan escaped him, barely audible over the wind, yet it tore through her chest. The second officer's lips quivered as he tried to speak. The words were swallowed by the cavern's echo. Water. Cold. A third remained perfectly still, an inert shadow. Panic threatened to consume her, the kind that made your throat tight and limbs heavy, but she forced herself to kneel on the gravel, letting Bramble sit firmly at her side. Her fingers brushed against loose stones, each one pressing cold into her palms. "You have to help them," she whispered to herself, though her voice felt fragile in the vast emptiness. She inched closer, breath held. The first officer's eyes opened slowly, blinking against the dim light filtering through the sides of the bridge. His gaze was blank for a moment, fogged with pain and confusion before it settled on her. A weak, strangled sound escaped him. She swallowed hard. She had no idea what to do. None of her childhood heroics had prepared her for this. Yet she knew running was impossible. Running meant leaving them behind. And she couldn't do that. Bramble pressed his head against her shoulder, reassuring her without words. She knelt fully now, hands trembling, and reached out to the nearest officer. His uniform was damp and torn, stained dark in some places. She hesitated, then placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. "We'll get you out. You're not alone." The first officer blinked, his lips parting in a weak attempt at a smile, though the effort left his eyes glassy and full of pain. The second officer shifted slightly, shivering, trying to curl into himself for warmth. And the third, still nothing. Her chest tightened again. The wind picked up, sweeping through the bridge, tugging at her hair, whipping at the loose hem of her jacket. She felt the cold creep into her bones, the damp clinging to her knees as she crouched. Her hands were shaking so badly that she had to grip the gravel to steady herself. She noticed the little details, the rhythmic dripping of water from above, the scent of moss growing in the cracks of the pillars, the faint hum of distant traffic above, all blending together into a tableau of dread and urgency. Bramble growled softly, low in his throat, and nudged her again. She drew a deep breath and whispered to the officers, "Hold on, please, just hold on. I'll get help." Her voice cracked, but she repeated it. Her words seemed to hang in the cold air like smoke, visible only to the trembling figures before her. And yet, despite her fear, a strange determination settled in her chest. She had found them. She couldn't walk away now. A pebble shifted beneath her hand, sending a tiny cascade down the slope toward the river. The sound startled her, but Bramble remained calm. She ran her hand along his fur, feeling the reassurance of his warmth and presence. "We can do this. We have to try." She allowed herself a moment to study them, faces pale, eyes wide in confusion and pain, bodies curled in awkward defensive postures. They weren't just strangers. They were people who needed her. They had become her responsibility, whether she was ready or not. Minutes passed like hours. The wind whistled, the river moaned against rocks, and the officers made small, almost imperceptible movements. The first raised a trembling hand. The second tried to speak again, his lips quivering. She focused on them, letting her fear fade into a steady resolve. Bramble's head rested lightly on her shoulder, nudging her gently whenever doubt crept in. The bridge, vast and silent above and around them, felt less like a prison now, and more like a world holding its breath, waiting for her to act. Finally, she took a shaky step back, leash in hand. Bramble stayed close, moving with her, ears alert, sensing her intentions. She looked around, searching for the nearest way to summon help, realizing that every second counted. Shadows stretched longer as the light outside dimmed further, but she was undeterred. These people depended on her, and fear was no longer an excuse. She squared her shoulders and whispered again, "I'll be back. Just hold on." As she approached the edge of the bridge, the wind carried a strange quiet over the water. Her heart was still pounding, adrenaline coiling through her chest. Bramble brushed against her leg, and she allowed herself a brief smile, though it trembled. The bridge loomed above, silent and imposing, yet beneath its shadow she had already begun to act. Courage, she realized, didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered, it nudged, it followed a dog through the dark. And somewhere in that quiet, shadowed underpass, the three officers waited, unaware that the smallest pair of hands and a loyal dog had already marked the beginning of their salvation. The edge of the bridge seemed impossibly distant now, yet every instinct in her small body demanded that she cross it, step by cautious step, and reach the outside world where help might exist. Bramble's leash was taut in her hand, a reminder that she was not alone, that she carried the quiet determination of a companion who understood more than she did. Her knees ached from crouching over gravel and concrete, and her fingers were raw from the cold. But she focused on the narrow beam of light that marked the way out. She could hear the soft groans of the officers behind her, each sound like a brittle thread stretching across the shadowed expanse of the underpass. She swallowed, throat tight with fear, and whispered to herself, "I can do this. I have to." Her first step back toward them was hesitant, each movement slow, deliberate, measured. She did not want to startle them. She did not want them to give up before she could help. Bramble padded close, low growl vibrating in his chest, ears swiveling, nostrils flaring at every scent of damp earth and cold metal. The first officer shifted slightly, pain etched into every line of his face, eyes glassy and wet, watching her with tentative recognition. The second murmured incoherently, curling tighter into himself, shivering against the cold that penetrated not just flesh, but spirit. The third remained still, a silent, terrifying reminder of how fragile life could be. She knelt beside the first officer, hands trembling as she reached out, brushing the damp fabric of his sleeve. "It's okay," she said softly, voice trembling but steadying with each repetition. "We'll get you out, you're not alone." His eyes fluttered, focusing on her small figure, the dog at her side. A flicker of relief passed through them before pain reasserted itself, and he exhaled shakily. Bramble pressed his head against her arm, grounding her, urging her to continue, to move with intention, to act despite the fear. The second officer's eyes, wide with confusion, flickered toward her. She offered a small, reassuring smile, even as tears pricked the corners of her eyes. "I'm here. I won't leave you. We're going to get through this." His lips quivered. He tried to speak, but only a faint croak emerged. She nodded, understanding the weight of the silence that followed. It was a language of pain and helplessness she could feel, though she couldn't fully articulate it. She moved slowly, placing her hands gently on the shoulders of each officer, gauging their reactions. The first leaned slightly into her touch, trusting the small warmth she offered. The second stiffened, unsure, then let out a shaky breath. The third still remained inert, face pale against the dark concrete, and she hesitated there, staring down at him. A surge of panic threatened to rise, but Bramble nudged her hand, soft and insistent, reminding her to breathe, to focus, to persist. The girl's thoughts were a jumble of fear and calculation. How could she help them all? How could she possibly carry their pain, their exhaustion, and the weight of their dependence on her small, fragile presence? But each time she faltered, Bramble was there, his steady presence reminding her that courage wasn't about size or strength, but about persistence, about being present in the face of helplessness. She took a deep breath, the air cold and damp, carrying the faint metallic tang of river and stone. Her palms pressed against the first officer's soaked uniform, feeling the rapid flutter of his pulse through the fabric. The second officer's shivering subsided slightly under her touch, the warmth of contact offering a fragile comfort in the oppressive cold. She whispered again, encouragingly, coaxing their attention, coaxing their hope. Her words were small, almost fragile, but in the cavernous underpass they resonated, filling the shadows with the faintest promise of salvation. Minutes stretched, each one heavy with tension. She realized that action, no matter how small, was itself revolutionary. Kneeling there, leaning into the pain of others, offering the gentlest touch, she was changing the world, not with grand heroics, but with relentless empathy. Bramble pressed closer, sensing her rising fear, grounding her with his warmth. She placed a hand on his head for a moment, drawing strength from his quiet assurance. The first officer tried to speak, voice rasping, broken. She leaned closer, attentive, listening, nodding. Every syllable he managed to whisper felt precious, a fragile bridge between despair and hope. The second officer's eyes, previously clouded with fear, now registered recognition. The smallest hint of trust flickered in his gaze, a fragile flame she clung to with fierce protectiveness. And though the third remained still, she could see the faint rise and fall of his chest, a rhythm that reassured her that he was still with them, still alive. She began speaking to them not just in words, but in presence. She hummed softly to Bramble, feeling the vibration move through her chest, a quiet anchor in the oppressive darkness. The officers, though unable to respond, seemed to notice, their small, shallow movements suggesting the recognition of care, of attention, of life persisting despite pain. The bridge towering above and around them seemed less like a cage and more like a hollowed witness to her bravery. Hours might have passed in those moments, though in reality it was likely only minutes. Time became distorted under the bridge, each second a suspended note, each breath a fragile tether to reality. Her hands were raw, fingers grazed by gravel and cold stone, yet she did not falter. Her voice, low and insistent, offered directions, comfort, promises. Bramble stayed close, his fur brushing her arm, tail flicking faintly in anxious rhythm. Together they became a small beacon in the heavy shadows, guiding the injured officers through trust and touch alone. She finally allowed herself a pause, brushing a damp strand of hair from her eyes. The officers had shifted minutely, responding to her gentle insistence. She realized that courage sometimes was measured not in heroic feats, but in the relentless continuation of care, in the refusal to turn away even when fear threatened to overwhelm. Bramble licked her hand softly, grounding her, reminding her that every small gesture mattered. Her voice grew firmer. "We're going to get help. Stay with me." She pointed toward the distant light at the end of the underpass, a faint hint of sky peeking through the darkness. Her words carried not only instruction but reassurance, a fragile thread connecting them to the possibility of rescue. And slowly, subtly, she noticed that the officers were responding. One hand lifted, a faint shift in posture, a trembling acknowledgement that someone was there, someone who would not abandon them. The wind gusted again, cold and cutting, sweeping through the bridge, carrying with it whispers of the outside world. She took a deep breath, allowing the chill to sharpen her focus rather than weaken her resolve. Bramble pressed against her side, ears twitching, alert to every sound, every motion. Together they prepared for the next step, bridging the gap between the shadowed underpass and the warmth and safety that lay beyond. For the first time, she felt a small surge of hope. The officers were alive. They were responding. And though she was small, though her hands were raw, though the wind bit at her face and the cold gnawed at her bones, she realized that she had begun to make a difference. Please, her voice cracked, swallowed by the night air, but she repeated it, each shout a lifeline thrown into the vast distance. Bramble barked insistently, a sharp, urgent sound that cut through the muted city. He leapt slightly, alert to some unseen rhythm, urging her to persist, to hold on. And then far off, almost impossibly distant, she heard it. The wail of sirens. Her chest tightened, a surge of relief and disbelief washing over her. She stumbled forward, heart hammering, waving both arms, guiding the attention of the approaching vehicle. Red and blue lights sliced through the dusk, reflecting off the wet pavement and illuminating her small, trembling form. Relief surged so suddenly that she gasped, unable to believe that hope had arrived so tangibly, so fiercely, so suddenly. She guided the emergency responders to the edge of the bridge, breathless and shivering. Her hands shook, pointing toward the shadowed underpass below, narrating what she had seen with fractured words, urgent and raw. Bramble stayed at her side, sensing the importance of this moment, tail flicking nervously but his posture steadfast. The responders nodded, understanding her instructions, and prepared to descend. The girl's heart pounded as she watched. Realizing the enormity of what she had done, she had found them, tended to them in their pain, and now had summoned the aid that could truly save them. The officers' groans echoed faintly, reaching her ears in the distance. Each sound a thread of fear and hope, a fragile testament to their persistence in the shadowed world below. Her body trembled with the weight of what she had witnessed and the urgency of what was unfolding. Every echo of their voices reminded her that lives hung in balance, and that her small presence had made the difference between isolation and salvation. Bramble pressed his head against her leg, eyes wide and intelligent, sensing her fear but offering unwavering support. As the paramedics descended, she followed closely, careful not to rush, careful to maintain the fragile trust she had built with the officers. The air under the bridge smelled of damp concrete and river, of cold metal and faint iron, a pungent reminder of the vulnerability that had brought them here. She crouched beside the first officer, whispering words of reassurance, pressing her hand gently to his shoulder. His eyes met hers, fleetingly softening with recognition, as though acknowledging that even in this terrifying shadowed place, he was not alone. The second officer shifted toward her touch, shivering less violently now, the warmth of human contact seeping through the cold and fear. And the third, still lying motionless, gave the faintest, almost imperceptible rise of his chest, a subtle rhythm that reminded her that life persisted, fragile but resilient. The bridge's dark arches loomed above them, silent witnesses to the quiet heroism unfolding in their midst. Her small hands, her careful voice, and Bramble's steadfast presence had begun a chain reaction that might save them. Minutes stretched and compressed simultaneously. The paramedics worked quickly but methodically, stabilizing the officers, wrapping them in blankets, and communicating with one another in calm, efficient tones. The girl remained close, whispering encouragement, her fingers brushing the damp concrete when she knelt to steady herself. Bramble pressed his body against her side, a tail flicking faintly as he observed the flurry of activity. She felt the tension ebb slightly as each officer was assessed and lifted, the immediate danger receding under the combined weight of care, attention, and professional skill. Finally, the officers were secured, each lifted into the warmth and light that had seemed so distant before. The girl sank to her knees on the cold gravel, Bramble curling at her side. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, unbidden but welcome, carrying relief, fear, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility discharged into the night. The wind still whispered through the bridge, but it no longer felt menacing. It carried with it the promise that they would survive, that her actions, small and hesitant at first, had been enough. She looked up at the paramedics, eyes wide and shaking, and whispered, "A thank you. Thank you for coming." Bramble licked her hand gently, grounding her, and she allowed herself a brief smile, small but genuine. The bridge, once oppressive and shadowed, now seemed almost protective in its vast, silent way, cradling the space where courage, however fragile, had taken root. As they lifted the last officer, she stepped back slightly, letting the professionals take over, but never straying far. Her gaze lingered on the shadowed underpass, the water below, the echoing arches that had witnessed fear, pain, and the smallest acts of bravery. Bramble nudged her hand, tail flicking softly, and she stroked his fur in quiet gratitude. Together they had navigated the tension, the echoes, the fear, and now they could watch as hope finally reached those who needed it most. The sirens continued to wail in the distance, growing fainter as the ambulance departed. She stayed a moment longer, heart pounding, chest heavy, wind pressing against her face like a gentle reminder that the world persisted, alive and unpredictable. She had faced fear, had acted despite it, and had begun to see the edges of hope where once there had only been shadows. The concrete beneath her knees felt less threatening now, a familiar surface that had borne witness to hours of tension, fear, and quiet determination. The paramedics had arrived, their presence slicing through the oppressive shadows of the underpass with controlled urgency. Red and blue lights from their vehicles danced across the damp walls, reflecting in the shallow puddles that mirrored fractured pieces of the girl and her dog. Bramble stayed close, low and alert, tail flicking occasionally as he watched the professionals move with careful efficiency. The girl guided them step by step, voice quivering but precise, pointing out the officers' positions, describing what she had seen, what she knew of their injuries. Each instruction was a lifeline, every whispered detail a bridge connecting panic and chaos to order and care. Her small hand shook, but her resolve never wavered. She had been the first witness, the first presence of hope, and now she became the quiet guide leading these strangers towards salvation. The first officer was lifted carefully, arms trembling as paramedics wrapped blankets around his soaked uniform. His face was pale, eyes glassy, but in that brief moment of recognition, he managed a weak, grateful nod. The second officer shivered violently, his lips quivering, but Bramble pressed close to him, a living conduit of warmth and reassurance. Even the third officer, who had remained almost motionless for so long, was now attended to, paramedics checking for pulse, adjusting his position, whispering calm encouragement. The girl knelt beside them, whispering softly, "Stay with me. You're not alone. We're here." Time seemed to stretch, elongated by the mixture of relief, exhaustion, and lingering fear. The paramedics worked quickly but with careful attention, the weight of responsibility evident in each movement. The girl felt her heart swell with a mixture of awe and humility. These professionals, so calm under pressure, reminded her that courage existed on many levels, in persistence and care, in the steady, deliberate acts that stitched the fragile threads of life back together. Bramble nudged her hand, and she squeezed his fur in quiet gratitude. Together, they had made this moment possible. She watched the officers' faces as they were lifted, noting the subtle shifts. The first officer's eyes softened, a trace of relief mingling with pain, the second's jaw and clenched shivers subsiding. The third's chest rose in small, regular rhythm, a reassuring pulse that spoke of life's stubborn persistence. Her fingers brushed against the damp gravel beneath her, grounding herself in the reality of the rescue, reminding herself that fear had been conquered not by inaction but by steady, determined presence. One paramedic looked down at her, expression softening. "You did good," he said quietly, voice carrying an authority tempered with warmth. "You stayed. You didn't leave them." The girl nodded, unable to speak at first. Her throat was raw from shouting, her chest still quivering from adrenaline, but she felt an overwhelming warmth of validation and relief. The Bramble pressed against her side, nudging her hand, and she allowed herself a small, shaky smile. The wind still whispered through the arches of the bridge, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the muted pulse of the river below. The once ominous underpass now seemed almost sacred, a hollowed chamber that had held fear, suffering, and courage all in the same breath. Every echo of the officers' groans, every ripple of water against concrete, every gust of wind had become part of a rhythm that marked survival. The girl realized that this space, once terrifying, had borne witness to something extraordinary, the quiet, persistent strength of a small heart refusing to turn away. She followed the paramedics as they prepared to lift the officers into the ambulances, guiding them carefully over slick gravel and uneven concrete. Bramble stayed steadfast at her side, his presence a living anchor. The first officer looked up at her, eyes soft, voice hoarse. "Thank you, kid." The second nodded faintly, lips pressed together in silent acknowledgement, while the third's faint stirring suggested awareness returning gradually. The girl's chest tightened, an unnameable emotion flooding her. Relief, pride, exhaustion, and the lingering ache of having witnessed profound vulnerability. As the ambulances departed, lights flashing and sirens fading into the distance, the girl and Bramble remained at the edge of the bridge, watching the space where shadow had once dominated. The wind carried a softer note now, brushing past her face like a whispered acknowledgement. She knelt on the gravel, hands pressing into the cold stone. Bramble's warm body curled beside her. The echoes of fear and pain still lingered faintly, but they were tempered now by the tangible presence of help, of safety, of life persisting against odds that had seemed insurmountable. She allowed herself to breathe fully for the first time in hours, letting the adrenaline drain from her body in slow, deliberate exhalation. Tears rolled down her cheeks, carried silently by the wind, for fear survived in memory. For bravery had been tested, and for the knowledge that she had made a difference. Bramble rested his head on her knee, warm and alive, offering silent reassurance that even in the aftermath, presence mattered as much as action. Later, when the bridge was silent once more, she sat quietly with Bramble at her side, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The officers were safe, alive, and slowly recovering. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown, yet her courage had persisted. She realized that heroism was not about accolades or recognition. It was about showing up, being present, and refusing to let fear dictate inaction. Bramble nudged her hand gently, and she smiled through her tears, understanding that her small act had rippled outwards, saving lives and carrying hope. The bridge, looming silent and strong above her, seemed almost to bow in acknowledgement. It had held darkness, cold, fear, and suffering. Yet it had also borne witness to resilience, to compassion, to courage born from the smallest heart. She pressed her hands against the cold concrete, feeling the rough texture beneath her palms, and whispered, "Thank you," though she did not know whether she meant to the bridge, to fate, or to the unseen force that had guided her and Bramble to this place. In that quiet, reflective moment, she understood something profound. The line between fear and courage is measured not in the absence of panic, but in the decision to act despite it. She had seen life hang by a fragile thread, had offered her presence as a tether, and in doing so had discovered a strength she had never known she possessed. Bramble, sensing her emotions, nudged her shoulder with his head, and she leaned into him, drawing comfort from his warmth and loyalty. The bridge's arches seemed to cradle them, the river murmuring beneath, wind brushing softly against stone and flesh. The officers, lifted from the darkness into warmth and safety, would never know the full depth of the girl's courage, but that did not matter. What mattered was that she had acted, had faced the unknown, had held steady when the world below seemed to collapse. And in that steadfast presence, life had been saved, hope restored, and a small girl and her dog had proven that even the youngest and smallest among us can carry immense responsibility with grace and tenacity. As she finally rose to leave, the bridge towering above her, she felt an unspoken bond with the space, with the river, with the quiet witnesses of shadow and light. Bramble brushed against her leg, tail wagging faintly, and she whispered softly, "We did it. We really did it." The air was colder now, tinged with the promise of night, yet warm in its acknowledgement of life, resilience, and the delicate beauty of courage. The ambulance lights faded into the distance, leaving behind only the echo of sirens, the murmur of the river, and the quiet whisper of wind through concrete pillars. She watched a final time, letting the enormity of what had transpired settle into her bones. Every shiver, every whispered word, every touch of warmth she had offered had mattered, and in that knowledge, she felt a seed of strength take root, a quiet understanding that the smallest actions could carry the heaviest consequences, the most profound impact. Bramble pressed his head to her shoulder as they began to walk back, side by side, shadows lengthening behind them. The bridge receded into darkness, silent yet alive with memory. She understood that the story of this night would linger forever, etched into her consciousness, a testament to the fragile, relentless power of courage and empathy. And though she was exhausted, though fear still lingered faintly at the edges of her mind, she knew that she had faced the impossible, had acted when it mattered most, and had witnessed something sacred. the quiet miracle of life preserved through love, attention, and unflinching presence. The night had settled over the city, soft and deep, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic, the whisper of wind across rooftops, and the muted pulse of the river beneath the bridge. The underpass, once a cavern of fear and shadows, now lay silent, holding within it the echoes of courage, pain, and survival. The girl walked slowly, Bramble at her side, tail flicking softly, fur brushing against her jeans as they moved together in quiet companionship. Each step felt heavy yet grounding, the weight of the night and of what she had witnessed pressing gently against her chest. She paused at the edge of the bridge, looking down into the space where the officers had been moments before. The shadows had not disappeared. They lingered in the corners, the cracks of concrete, the faint glimmer of water pooling on the floor. But they no longer held the same oppressive power. They were softened now by memory, by intervention, by life preserved through presence. The girl reached out a hand, almost touching the cool stone, and whispered, "We did it. We made it through." Bramble nudged her palm with his nose, and she smiled softly, feeling the warmth of his loyalty, the quiet affirmation of their shared journey. The city above was alive with soft light, the kind that promised safety, warmth, and the normal rhythm of human life continuing despite the horrors hidden in its underbelly. The girl thought of the officers, now in warmth and safety, tended by strangers who had been guided to them by her small, determined presence. A wave of awe and relief washed over her. She had acted without hesitation, offering touch, voice, and unwavering attention when it mattered most. That simple courage, born of instinct and love, had changed lives in ways she could barely comprehend. Bramble trotted ahead, then paused to look back, ears flicking, eyes bright. She followed him, each step measured, each breath a reminder that life went on, fragile but persistent. She thought of the first officer, his trembling nod, the second officer, the small flicker of trust in his eyes, and the third, whose quiet resilience had shown even in stillness. Each life preserved was a testament not to grand heroics but to relentless presence, to refusal to turn away, to the delicate strength of empathy. She paused at a small puddle reflecting the moonlight. Bramble crouched beside her, nose twitching at the cool water. She knelt, tracing the ripples with her fingertips, thinking of how far courage could reach. Even the smallest acts, a whispered word, a gentle touch, a dog's steadfast loyalty, had become the bridge between despair and hope. The memory of the officer's fear, the oppressive darkness beneath the bridge, the sharp wind and echoing water, all blended into a mosaic of tension now tempered by relief. As she rose, the bridge looming above her, she realized that the world beneath its arches would always carry the memory of that night. The hours when shadows pressed close and life trembled on the edge. But she also understood that the bridge, cold and silent, had witnessed more than fear. It had witnessed courage, empathy, and a quiet, stubborn insistence on preserving life. And in that realization, she felt a profound shift within herself. The small heart that had walked into darkness, trembling, unsure, and afraid, had emerged stronger, wiser, and aware of the power of presence. Bramble nudged her gently, tail wagging faintly, and she allowed herself a deep, steadying breath. The wind brushed against her face, softer now, almost a caress, and carried with it the distant fading sound of sirens that marked life continuing. People cared for, lives preserved. She felt a sense of closure, not because the bridge or the night had changed, but because she had changed. She had become a witness and participant in something larger than herself, a story of courage and quiet heroism unfolding in real time. The path home was lined with dim streetlights, casting long shadows that mingled with the memory of the bridge behind her. Each step she took was a meditation, a reflection on the fragile yet relentless persistence of life. Bramble stayed close, their connection unspoken but deeply felt, a reminder that companionship and loyalty could anchor even the most uncertain moments. She thought of how fear had felt earlier, a heavy, constricting force, and marveled at how presence and action had transformed it into purpose, a clear and tangible power to effect change. As they reached her small home, the warm light spilling from windows into the quiet street felt like a tangible embrace. She opened the door, Bramble slipping in beside her, and allowed herself a moment to breathe fully, body sagging with exhaustion yet heart alive with reflection. The events of the night would not leave her, would not fade quietly. They had left an imprint, a reminder of the delicate balance between fear and courage, darkness and light, helplessness and intervention. She knelt to Bramble, pressing her forehead against his warm fur. "We did good, didn't we?" she whispered, voice raw but calm, carrying the weight of relief and wonder. He nudged her cheek, a small grounding gesture as if to say, "Yes, we did." The bridge, the river, the shadows, the wind, all of it had tested them, but together they had endured. Together they had brought life back from the edge of despair. Later she returned to the window, gazing toward the distant silhouette of the bridge. The arches were dark, looming, but no longer menacing. They held memory, yes, but also testimony. A fear-faced of courage embraced into the quiet, miraculous power of steadfast presence. She realized that life was often measured in small, almost imperceptible acts. The decision to stay, to speak, to touch, to listen, to walk toward fear rather than away. That night she had measured herself in those acts and had found strength she never knew she possessed. The city hummed softly in the distance, carrying the rhythms of lives moving forward. The girl and Bramble settled beside each other, the warmth of the room a stark contrast to the cold underpass they had left behind. She thought of the officers, imagining them safe, wrapped in blankets, breathing easy, beginning to heal. She felt a quiet pride tempered by humility, knowing she had played a small but vital role in preserving those lives. Outside, the moonlight touched the river gently, silver ripples reflecting the quiet of a world continuing, alive and unpredictable. She pressed her hands against Bramble's fur, drawing comfort from his living warmth. Shadows remained, of course. The bridge would always stand and darkness would always exist. But so too did light, hope, and courage. And in that balance she found a profound sense of peace. Finally, she whispered into the night, soft but certain, "A thank you for letting us find them. Thank you for letting us do what needed to be done." Bramble leaned into her, eyes bright and alert, and she allowed herself to smile fully, unrestrained. Life was fragile, terrifying, and beautiful, but it was theirs to hold, to nurture, to protect. And in that quiet knowledge, the girl and her dog sat together, side by side, gazing at the bridge from afar, witnesses and participants in a story of light emerging from shadows. The night stretched around them, calm now, alive with the quiet affirmation that courage, courage, however small, mattered. Every echo beneath the bridge, every shiver in the cold, every whispered word of reassurance had led to this: survival, reflection, and the understanding that even the smallest hearts can carry immense strength. And somewhere in the rhythm of wind, river, and city hum, she felt the lingering pulse of hope, persistent and unyielding, like a light that would never fully fade.